Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Guardians of the Data Galaxy panel. It's brilliant to be with you all today. My name's Sue Daly. I'm Associate Director of Technology and Innovation at Tech UK, and it's my pleasure to be your chair and your host for this fascinating discussion that we've got today. And we've got a brilliant panel of speakers to talk really about the power of data and how we unlock power of data, particularly as we move from the world of open banking, open finance, and more use and a broader use of customer data. Of course, with great power comes great responsibility. So how do we get this right? What are we seeing organizations doing right now? What are we seeing in terms of trends, key issues, technical responses, and also some of the issues and challenges we may need to face coming down the line? This panel is really well placed to get into the meat of some of these issues and discussions, particularly also looking at how technical products and solutions are being developed that could help, but also some of the legal regulatory trends that we're seeing, and perhaps even the direction of travel that data protection, data privacy is taking, not just here in the UK, in the EU, but also around the world. We've got a really global panel for you today. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So great that you can join us. Please remember that you can add any questions or comments for our panel in the chat function or to the right of your screen. So please feel free to do that, or any comments as the discussion continues. It'd be great to have your input. So before we kick off with the discussion, I'm just going to quickly ask our panel to introduce themselves, their role and where they come from, so you get to know who they all are. So Sorska, maybe let's start with you, if we may, please.
Of course, thank you. So my name is Sorcha Lorimer. I'm the Chief Privacy and Risk Officer at the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence. I'm also the founder of Trace Data. So we exist to help organizations look after the data that matters. And we do that by helping them apply privacy by design frameworks for meaningful data governance.
Brilliant, brilliant to have you with us, and thank you so much. Let's go to Yojas next, who's coming live from Singapore. So Yojas, can you just introduce yourself and where you come from, please?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Thanks for the introduction overall for today's topic. I'm quite excited to join from Singapore on this fascinating topic. And I'm a data engineer and coming from a very technical background. I have worked into various industries, like including healthcare or manufacturing, telecom, retail, and recently I'm working with the financial sector. I'm currently working with the DBS Bank, and I'm a public speaker as well, along with the journey towards data. So very glad to join.
Oh, it's brilliant to have you with us. And Mark, over to you.
Thanks for the invite. And my name is Marc-André Schaubecker. I'm a Swiss lawyer, and I wrote my doctoral thesis in the field of money laundering and banking secrecy while working part-time. And then afterwards I did an MBA and worked for several banks. Also regarding, let's say, investment banking, compliance. And then currently I'm working for Credit Suisse as vice president and responsible for cloud and data analytics, and also part of the Swiss Banking Association. And yeah, also regarding
such
cloud
experience
and data
already. And Emma, that you can join us all the way from California, right? So just introduce yourselves to everybody. That would be great.
Thank you, Sue, and thanks to all the participants on this panel. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. My name is Emma McConaughey, and I am a partner at Sterling. We are a global law firm based in New York City and have offices pretty much everywhere. I am part of the intellectual property group, and I lead the data privacy and cybersecurity here. And what that means on a day-to-day basis is that I focus on complex innovation, development, and growth issues for global clients that are in technology and data. I've been doing this a little over 20 years, much to my surprise. And I have worked across 3 continents, in the United Kingdom, and then I've moved into APAC, and now I'm based in the, so I've got a really great perspective on sort of US, UK, and Pacific technology and.
So we've got a great panelist. We've got a great topic, Guardians of the Data Galaxy, right? This is a wide issue and a wide topic, but let's try and maybe narrow it down and talk about some of the issues that you're seeing from your perspectives, from your current role, from your current location, because this is really a global panel. Let's touch on perhaps some of the trends, some of the themes, some of the issues around data use, data privacy, data governance, from obviously an open banking, open finance point of view, but obviously a bit broader as well. Let's perhaps start with Saoirse. From your perspective, in your current role, in your current location, what are some of the issues and trends you're seeing around how organizations are perhaps getting their hands around, getting the balance right between unlocking the value, the power of data, but getting data privacy and trust right as well? What are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, I think 2020 has obviously been a truly historic year. It's not over yet, but it's been a great big accelerator. It's accelerated digital trends. It's accelerated us all, from working from home and for adopting new technology. From someone that previously worked in digital transformation, I guess some of that will lead to very positive changes for us as humanity. But it's also shown us that compliance and risk assessment have really gone too slowly, and they've been too disconnected from the core of the business. So I believe passionately that the risks need to be considered, and to push data protection risk assessments and so forth, or impact assessments out completely is obviously a mistake, because forewarned is forearmed and all that. But actually, you need to do it, but you need to do it in a much more connected way, so people working together, and so that sort of data governance agility is really what's needed. And again, it's been an example of really kind of showing that actually collaboration and working together really needs to come together. So there's been a lot of positive come out of 2020 once we have time to digest all of that. So that kind of points us towards a more by design approach. Privacy by design, security by design, compliance by design, that really brings in the connectivity of that business. So those approaches are not new, but I think 2020 has been the year when we've been moving from less of a project-based approach to bringing it more into the heart of what we're doing, which is fantastic. But there's still immense challenges in terms of working through that legal complexity at speed. Is tough. And immense challenges in terms of working out what is private and what can be open, and where do you respect the end user versus making sure that importantly data is unlocked for research or medical advancement or for understanding what's happening in the economy.
Yeah, right. Emma, perhaps we can come to you from a legal point of view as well. What are you seeing in your side of the world as well around trends and themes and issues this year particularly?
There's been a lot to digest this year, and to Saoirse's point, the move to a distributed global work presence has been an accelerator in many ways. But like all accelerants, the factors that are being accelerated have always been there. This has been the fuel that has taken it forward. And I think now more than ever, we're really starting to see the importance of good, accurate, data-driven decisions. And that's just as relevant in the public sector as in the private. A lot of what I'm seeing here in the state is, sort of a speeding up of the move towards a greater balance between privacy rights and treating them as rights, and the need to harness data as both an asset and intellectual, but that has intellectual property value. And one of I've been a practitioner in this space for some time, and one of the things that, especially having my European origins and having practiced in Europe and then being here in the United States, is that there is this greater move in the US to treat data as we're not quite at the point where it's a human right, but we're certainly have some structures around how to treat sensitive data. In the past, and in the present, it is still relatively fragmented approach where it has taken a vertical approach towards regulating types of sensitive data, whether it's financial information, healthcare information, education information about children, or credit history. So those are certain sectors that are regulated. But I think what you're seeing is, given the overwhelming consumer need and demand for greater privacy, notwithstanding the privacy paradox, businesses are starting to position themselves as having good data governance, treating that as a competitive advantage. That is slowly but surely going to make its way through legislation and regulators reflecting societal needs. But that is certainly a trend over on this side of the pond that I think many Europeans have been surprised with. And the big, the bellwether for that is the California Privacy Act, which recently went into effect. What happened in California eventually tends to happen in one form or another in other parts of the country. And I think if you're looking for clues for what's happening in the U.S., that's from a regulatory perspective.
Thanks, Emma, and love to come to Yojas now. And in terms of, you're at the coalface, you're working with organizations and with businesses and helping them really explore and gain the value from their data. So would love to hear, Yojas, what are you're seeing? What are you seeing from your day-to-day activities in terms of how organizations are looking to, make the most of their data, but also get privacy and trust right as well? I'd love to get your perspectives.
As Anna just explained, from the data governance point of view, when it comes to the tech implementation, and when we are looking at the data at a centralized platform, where it's humongous, and we need really right set of enforcement enforcement point from the data security aspect, that as it is open source and as users can actually consume data for their own use cases, having the right security and having tokenization of the data, and especially for the PII, the personal data, and then getting these insights and making it available for everyone is very, very important, because when we are implementing or having the right governance, and we can obviously see the metadata of the entire organization. But having said, we can't really see the sensitive data, and it has to be placed properly in the platform when we have many enterprise tools running parallel. So that is something like a very crucial aspect when we implement from the security perspective.
Brilliant insight. Thanks so much. And Mark, just from your perspective as well, from, of course, the legal background, but of this side of the pond, maybe, as opposed to Emma, what are some of the trends? What are some of the themes, some of the issues you're seeing from your perspective before we get into a bit of the meat of this discussion?
So the use of data is becoming increasingly important for the financial industry, of course, also. The way in which data can be used will continue to evolve, because also technology will evolve, and responsible and transparent use of data will enable a financial institution to offer personalized services. Not that we can just, sell every product to everyone, so that we see, okay, this person has an affinity to, let's say, sustainability, and the other one just doesn't care about that and just wants, the best return. So with data, we can really analyze the client's need. And even in banking association, we are developing and working on such a non-binding guidelines, so how to analyze and treat data. And regarding trends, I see several data privacy trends for 2021. So of course, the rise of regulations will continue. We had it with GDPR and CCPA in California, as Emma, of course, knows. And then the so-called data graveyard, like what do you do with all the data, also deletion and so on. And then the new roles of also DPOs, should only DPOs, the data protection officer, care about data, or should it be the whole company? And more fines and awareness. So it has just started also in the European Union with the fines. So and now even in Switzerland, we have to also adapt, and because we want that we are treated equivalent, and therefore we have had to adapt also our Data Protection Act. And transparency, of course, is very important, and also the third-party risk assessment, that also the suppliers and vendors comply with our rules and data protections. And yeah, there are not enough experts for cybersecurity and data privacy. That's a bit of a problem. So.
Really interesting and fascinating insight from where we are in terms of your different perspectives. And Mark, you raise a good point in terms of how how organizations have had to adapt to what laws and regulations are changing here and in our jurisdictions. But Emma, just to bring maybe with your global hat on, so we've seen stricter rules around protection of customer, control of data, and protection of over access of data over here in the UK and Europe, to all sectors and industries. And I just wonder, given your kind of global view, whether you think this is a trend we're going to see around the world, and will other countries follow suit, perhaps, you think, in terms of the approach that's Mark described that we've seen here in the UK and across Europe as well? Do you think that's where we're...
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think in some senses that trend has already started happening at different pace in different countries for good reason, right? I think everybody has an interest in harnessing the power of data for whatever is individual countries need, and for collective action on a multilateral level. And wherever one big power goes, others tend to go as well for their own reasons. The challenge, of course, when you are a global entity of any kind, is that 100 different jurisdictions, you're maybe going to be compliant in 100 if you're lucky. And I think there will be a greater trend towards harmonization. But I mean, if Europe is anything to go by, getting 28 still, I think, just countries to think the same about data use, data collection, data deletion, access rights is a challenge, let alone trying to do it on a global level. But I think that is the direction of travel. And if I'm a startup or an investor or a company in this space, one of the first questions I'm asking is, what is your data governance posture relative to the regulatory regime in the countries that you choose to operate in? And that's a nuanced question, because some entities may simply not choose to operate in certain countries just because it's too hard to comply, or it's not, there isn't the right sort of product market fit relative to their own data governance posture. But that is certainly the direction of travel. And I mean, I think just the fact that there is a California Consumer Privacy Act in the United States, it gives you some sense of the way that the US is moving, and at least the sort of 325 million people in this particular jurisdiction. And most recently, after the last set of elections, there was a new ballot put forward, which is the California Privacy Rights Act. And that sounds like a simple shift in name, but it's not, because you're talking about privacy rights, which are not something that have been enshrined, certainly not at the federal level in the United States. The government applies those kinds of laws to themselves, but not to consumers and businesses. So we're starting to talk about privacy rights as an inalienable human right, which is a relatively new concept. I mean, California has treated privacy as a human right before, but it's not a widespread concept, and it's starting. And back to the point that I made about competitive advantage, global companies have got this. They totally understand that this is a differentiator. Investors are thinking about this from an ESG perspective. Consumers are voting with their feet or their apps or their downloads, right? They are looking for privacy protective alternatives as people become more and more aware of the value of their data and what that represents in an economy. So I absolutely think this is the direction of travel, if nothing else, because of consumer demand.
Sorcha, I'd love to bring you in here in terms of what you're seeing from the business point of view as well. And I think we'll obviously look at financial services sector here in terms of what the move from open banking to open finance means from a greater access to data and more use of data. But I know you're working in other sectors as well. So I just wondered whether you might be able to touch on, what could perhaps the financial services sector learn from other sectors and industries that are looking at how data can be really used and they can unlock the power of data, and what you think that says for where financial services might be heading, if that makes sense.
So yeah, I think well, actually, in many cases, this sector, financial services is taking away, and I think for me, where innovation happens, learning happens, is the industry. So actually we can always kind of look to different industries and learn. So I think there's kind of two directions where they could look, and one is in international research. So this kind of more concept of the workbench and what data that you would unlock to be shared, whether that be open data and kind of unlocking that power of the open data versus the private data, and then use cases for synthetic data. So there's a lot in that kind of more research-based model. In terms of healthcare medical data, I mean, that's almost harder. So actually, you could take learnings from the frameworks that have been developed for health data and for special category and high-risk data, because once you understand how to do it for really, really important data, as it were, I mean, all data is important, but obviously there's kind of categorization within, then you can then apply it to other kind of grades of data. So once you kind of crack that nut. And as I said, I think that it's really compelling for me when I work with companies when it comes to medical data, because actually, you're working on a project that might be saving someone's life. So it creates this burning platform, this compelling need. But actually, I think what we need to think about here is it's not just health data or medical data, which is life or death scenario. Actually, the economy failing and people not able to eat, mental health issues, much wider issues are burning issues, and the climate emergency is a burning issue. So actually, what really we need to do, and also what 2020 has shown us in political terms, is let's focus on the science, let's focus on the data, let's have a more objective approach to designing the policies. So I'm hopeful that kind of thinking is really kind of channeled into the government's whichever kind of color political creed, but really just actually let's just kind of focus things on facts and evidence.
And Jess, I'd love to bring you in here on this in terms of then you're working day to day to helping business leaders understand how they can use their data more, right? And the what you call the democratization of data within an organization. So you help people and organizations of how to technically do this. Perhaps you can just share with us how technology and how you're helping business leaders to understand and perhaps operationalize their data, and what you think is key learnings that perhaps people watching this panel should take within their own organizations from your day-to-day experience. What are you seeing? How are you helping organizations do?
Yeah, so this is very important when we have a huge data set and when we want to derive a lot of KPIs or insights for the organization. And when we are talking from the business perspective, like business users, like who are not really comfortable using data. So data democratization comes as a very important aspect. It's in a financial world, it's not as a culture or a practice where everyone get access to data, But if we slowly start utilizing it by having a right set implementation from the tech side and enable the rest of the business users to feel comfortable how easily I can actually make use of this platform, right? So in theory, it sounds like, okay, I'm going to make use of this by telling certain logic or how to make use of that. But it doesn't really work that easily. So what we have to do is by having right education system, which gives a broader vision of what we have in the data side and how easily you can visualize that from the business perspective, and having a right selection of tools. Because now, as things are moving so fast, it's important to use self-service tool rather than really manual ways of development, like which we used to follow, like a SDLC approach for a project development. When the business user used to give us requirement, the IT will develop and then you get your outcome. But what has changed now is you have access to data and you can actually use tools like a self-service and build something by your own. And the education system and the platform leads like me, or there are some other people in the platform who have specialization in their respective area, they can help a business user to execute this thing. So these are some of the really important aspects, like to enable and make it comfortable for all non-technical users to really feel like, yeah, I understand data, and now I can actually derive my own KPIs rather than relying on data analyst or data scientist completely. So, and that's like a good shift in the culture. So.
Great, and it's great to see that happening. And Mark, I suppose it helps. Just to come to you, it helps business leaders are operationalizing, or those tools and technologies are helping them operationalize the data. But we need to find a way also of operationalizing what they need to do around the governance, right? And the data protection, data policies and data procedures. So from your experience, how do we get that right? How do we make sure that the business leaders and organizations are operationalizing, the legal frameworks, the requirements we have right now? As Saoirse was talking about, a privacy by design approach. Is that what you're seeing from your perspective? Are we getting that right, or is there still more to be done?
Yeah, I think it's a continuous process, and data can be used for good and helpful solution, but of course also for not so good solutions as everything. So, for example, data analysis in healthcare can lead to better or faster, treatments for cancers and so on, and maybe detection of cancers, as many knows. That's of course a very good solution, and also, as I said, like with data analysis, we can also serve better the needs of our clients. But it can also be misused, that you then track the customer or and then just check him and try just to sell him more things and use it just for marketing purpose, or also healthcare data is sensitive. That it is good in one way to be able to maybe solve a problem or a disease, but it could then also be sold to insurance companies, and then you maybe get rejected to get if you apply for an insurance. So this is quite a small or a thin line. So it's in one way it can be used for good things, and of course the insurances are very keen to know all your healthcare data, and people think, oh, it's good. I have then a tracker and gives me hints how much I train and do exercise. But this data could go directly to the insurance, and so it is a thin line, and all the companies, they have to decide. Do they want to do as much as they can? I mean, if you put it in the terms and condition, and the customer signs it, you are allowed. But I mean, of course, not everything, but you can do a lot. And the companies have to decide, and what do they want to do? Like, for example, in Switzerland, the big Swatch company, Swatch, maybe you know them, at Omega and so other big brands, they have decided that they don't want to put any trackers in their watches. They could do it, but they didn't want it because they wanted to be different. so that they are well known not to track your data and healthcare data. So it is also an opportunity to differentiate and not to do everything. So
comes back to our kind of topic of today, the Guardians of the Data Galaxy, which I have to say is the coolest panel title I've ever had. About the power of data, but also the responsibility around data. And of course, as Emma, you touched on, there's the legal responsibilities and there's requirements and legal requirements, as Mark just pointed out. But then is this conversation, are you seeing, and I'd love to get others' perspectives on this, going beyond the law? It's not just about getting the law right, it's about the broader ethical issues and questions being asked around how data is being used and how data is perhaps being accessed or shared. Do you think that's become more of an issue in 2020, and perhaps what do we need to be thinking about as this conversation evolves around greater access to data, particularly as open banking moves to open finance? How we get this not just right from a legal point of view, and I know others have views on this, but how do we get this right from an ethical point of view? So Emma, maybe come to you, and then Saoirse, maybe come to you, if that's okay.
Sure. So, I mean, I think you're categorizing it in the right way. I mean, the use of data has, I think, a lot of the legal and compliance oriented issues that you have to think about. Everything from data minimization, using de-identified data wherever you can, good access controls, privacy by design, security by design, a lot of the, sort of nuts and bolts of what we advise our clients on, what all of us on this panel are pretty familiar with. Not using more data than you absolutely need to, and can you solve the same problem or gain the same insight without necessarily using all the data all the time. And I think a lot of what I'm seeing, at least out here, is that the more progressive technology companies in Silicon Valley are using this as a design challenge for their engineers. We all know that engineers like to work on new and shiny rather than retrofitting. And so just, posing it as a hackathon or as a gauntlet, saying, please design something where you don't have to have all the data all the time. And I think that's the right approach from a data use, collection, storage, and deletion type of perspective. But you need to zoom out a lot more than that and start thinking about the ethical use of data, the sources of data, making sure that you have representative data sets that really are truly representative of the constituents that you are trying to serve, whoever those constituents may be. And it's going to be different for different companies. A lot of what I do is advising boards and management about the ethical use of data. AI, obviously, a significant issue and has been for at least the last decade out here in Silicon Valley. Developing fair information use principles at a very high global level, and then drilling down on a use case by use case basis. And I think there is a real mix between law, philosophy, policy here, because I don't think anyone is going to get away with, the bots told me to do it. There is responsibility for autonomous agents and a requirement to have a transparency and explainable black box, so that everybody can understand how you made the data-driven decisions that you made, whether that is, in the autonomous mobility context, in the IoT context, whether it's providing credit or not providing credit to individual users. All of those data-driven decisions, which we are trying to encourage on the one side, need to be balanced with not just careful regulation, careful compliance, operationalizing all the laws, but just a broader perspective on the ethical use of data. And diversity, equity, and inclusion in that space is absolutely critical, not just from a sort of touchy-feely perspective, but you can't really make data-driven decisions if you have faulty or incomplete data. And that does, that feeds into that ethical use aspect of it. And as with any technology, to Mark's point, the technology itself is neutral. The uses to which you put it can be less neutral. So incomplete or inaccurate or inexplainable artificial intelligence-based decisions can have really, really negative implications. And I think anybody who's watching this can can figure out what those implications would be. So I think as practitioners in this space, from a policy perspective, from a government perspective, from an industry perspective, and frankly from a individual citizen perspective, we have a collective responsibility to get this right, or at least strive to get it right. And that means some laws, that means some government regulation, that means some industry action, collective industry action, which I think is really important. And it means doing the right thing from an ethical perspective.
Fascinating. And I want to come on to the diversity question in a minute, but before I do that, Saoirse, I'd love your views on this from an ethical point of view. Is that becoming more of an issue now around the kind of ethical use of data that you're seeing, and what do you think we should take from, as we look to 2021, take from this year to make sure we get this right?
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I love listening to Emma there, because it really kind of brought out how broad this area is. I mean, you've got data protection, you've got data security, privacy, the law, ethics, and actually these are, these can be distinct areas in their own right, philosophy, but actually they kind of come together, and that's probably what brings us all into this space. It makes it so interesting, but it just proves that the kind of more we dive into it and the more we mature in this space, because actually, data protection and looking at the GDPR, it's immature. Privacy is immature, and so we've got a long way to travel. The technology is immature, but so it's a really exciting space. So I think as we mature and dive into it, we realize how many other issues kind of come at play, and so ethics really has kind of zoomed in 2020. I think the whole kind of agenda with human rights and greater kind of movements around that, and questions around surveillance has really brought it to the forefront, which I'm very optimistic about, because I think sort of post 9/11 there was a sort of a tightening of laws, and that kind of global. We had that kind of big global issue, and then we had that kind of the greater state, the heavier state. But actually this time, so that's what the runes that I were reading back in March time, I was sort of thinking, well, this is kind of the general direction of travel. But actually there's this kind of groundswell view of actually, the human rights, which needs to kind of be kept at the forefront of this conversation, and the balance that we need to have. So ethics is really has been dialed up, and I think it recognizes as well that the lawmakers cannot keep pace of the innovation, and self-regulation does not work. So the ethics has a very vital role to play, and it's not something that's woolly. It's something that's very tangible. You need to very much look at what will be the good, what could be the negative impacts of doing this, and then it very much interplays with risk. What we're seeing is probably the rise of more ethical assessments. So not just your DPIAs and your risk assessments, actually an ethical assessment, or how can you bring the two together, and ethical frameworks, and just a lot of good conversations. I think good risk management is about a lot of good conversations, and the diversity is essential, and it's also diversity of thoughts. You might very risk-taking individuals, or very more conservative individuals, and if you can have a team which has that diversity and have those debates right up front, I think that's important too.
Yeah, I'd love to bring Yojas into this at this point, given your work, Yojas, and as a data engineer and working within this industry, how important is it to get that diversity issue right, and making sure that people working on data and data technology and how technologies are applied and used are reflective of society? And what's your perspective, or are you doing work in this area, and how important is that to you?
Yeah. Diversity is one of the really important point, and it is challenging at the same time. As if we have more domination, like even from the gender perspective, or even from any development happening with the similar set of users or people, developers, it doesn't bring up that kind of result that we are looking for. Like, for example, from the data science side, or for deriving these algorithms, where we are considering and calculating the logics from your own perspective. So gender really plays a very important role here, to have more and more people with especially in the development side, right, from the coding perspective. So it has been a challenge. Like I have seen in my team, personal observation, like when being in a platform team and we have like 80 to 100 people, but when it comes to the ratio of male versus female, it's less. So it's like 10 women or maybe even lesser. So, or most of the women tend to go for different kind of roles as well, where it is more towards not very data engineering side or data architect side, but something else. So it's also important to encourage and fill up this gap where we have equality, and also, from the development perspective, we have diversity to get the best out of it from the, even to meet the business requirements and the other outcomes. So that is something like I have seen in my personal experience, like very rarely there will be women going in the coding aspect. So I think that is very, very important.
Just, I agree. I think it's really important. And here in the UK, from an AI point of view, we have a champion, Dame Wendy Hall, who talks about if AI isn't diverse, it's not ethical. So it's a real tying the two together. And Mark, I'd love to get your perspectives from what you see on this in terms of, are you seeing an increase, of course, around data protected, data privacy rules and requirements and what's needed, but the ethical questions, is that coming into your work? And also perhaps, is that, if it is that being related to kind of AI technologies or do you think other technologies will have similar questions around these issues as well?
Yes, I was or I am interested in this, and there are in Switzerland, also on a, let's say, national level. There is like they try to create like an ethical data usage guideline, and not just for the banking area, for all the companies, big companies. And of course, all the companies have to define their strategy. And I was involved, and this is then not just black and white, because ethical is you need a bit judgment. So what do you want to do? Or like the business leaders have to decide what is their ethics of the company, or each company has then another, or each country, or each let's say person has a different understanding of ethics. There's not just a black or white. Maybe in Switzerland we have a different understanding than in UK and you in Singapore. So therefore this is different. So and companies have to define their own strategy, also data strategy, and data ethics is part of it. So, and there are like a committee that will take decisions when it's a bit, let's say, a gray area, and not just black and white. Right? From a legal point of view, we have implemented such a structure.
I think we are coming to the end of our time. It goes so quickly. I know there's a lot more we could talk about, but perhaps let's, if I may, and I'm kind of springing this on folk, but maybe one last question from you all to wrap this up. Given that we're talking about how we get the right balance between unlocking the power and the value of data, and also getting privacy, trust, ethics right, and what people need to be thinking about as we move from open banking to open finance. What is the, and I will allow two, but let's start with one. What is the one or two key messages or issues that you would like people watching this to take away from it and think about in their own organization or in their own work? What is the one or two key things that you think people should be thinking about, or looking in their own organizations from an operational or technical point of view to see whether they're getting this right and what more they need to do, perhaps. So, Emma, can I come to you? Sorry, to kick us off, and then we'll go around the rest of the panel, if that's okay.
No, it's a great question. About 2 seconds, you stole my thoughtful take. What was going through my head was that we've been talking a lot about process, procedure, policies, compliance, law, regulation, philosophy, government and trade body work. And I think all of those things are necessary prerequisites to being able to play in this space. But all of that can feel very heavy. And it can feel like an impediment towards innovation and just getting the product out there. And while clearly the sort of move fast and break things approach doesn't work in a highly regulated space, I think it's really important not to let the process get in the way of the result. And what I mean by that is that if you design and build a product that is intuitively trustworthy, and you have an organization, whether it's a company or otherwise, that positions itself and believes values that are aligned with fair information management principles, there's your win, right? That's how you make the right decision. That's how you make the right result, is that you start from the right place and then work backwards, rather than trying to retrofit a system or an organization with that. And if you go into this building intuitively trustworthy products, whatever your product or service may be, then I think you get to where you need to get to, and everything else just falls into line. That's the result you should be striving for, focusing less on getting the process is the means to an ends. And if you focus on the ends, then the process will, sort of sort itself out, for want of a better term.
So, Saoirse, I'd love your, 1-2 takeaways for everybody watching this discussion. What should they be taking from this discussion and back into their organizations from your point of view?
Yeah, so I think what I would really advocate is a principle-based approach to interpreting regulation. I mean, of course, there are lots of nuance and detail that you need to kind of dive into in regulations like the GDPR. But if you really dial it back to those core principles or principles of privacy by design or the principles of the GDPR, and you look at them, I think that gives you a good chance of getting it right across an organization. So if you just take 1 or 2 of those, if you think about transparency, let's take, what does that mean? How transparent can you be about the processing? How good is your privacy policy? Does it really explain what you're doing with that data? The governance that you have, the compliance documents, would you be willing to share that? Is your data sharing agreement, is that very clear? Is everyone kind of clear on what that's for? So that would be the kind of key principle that I would apply back, is that it's an intimidating and a complex area, but if you can get the core principles right, then you're far away there.
That's brilliant advice and really succinct for people to take back and look to. Jess, from your perspective, what do you want people to kind of take away from this discussion and go back to their organization?
Yeah. Takeaway from my perspective, from the open banking and the open finance, it is going to benefit customer a lot. So if we have right laws to control how we are implementing it, and having a right set of tools, it can actually help to gauge and deliver what customers are looking for by getting the maximum KPIs or even insights which we can't even discover with the limited access to the data. So this will really open up a different avenues of business and upscaling in the business as well as to the customers. So of course the customer has to abide to the laws and how we are protecting their data and not misusing it. It's very important at this point.
As well. And then Mark, last words to you. What's the 1-2 lessons or takeaways you want people listening to go back to their organizations with?
Yeah, I agree with all, and there's not like a checklist and then implement. And it's also not just the task of the data protection officer or the legal team. So it's even the data analysts and the IT experts have to think and have to have an overall strategy for the whole company, because many professions have a specific ethical codes. But when you think of medical ethics, legal ethics, military ethics, science ethics, and so on. But however, in the field of information technology, ethical codes are less common, so less developed and less prominent. And I think there we have to also develop. And in general, I would recommend everyone to think double when you give your data for free, because there's always a price with it.
Pieces of advice from our Guardians of the Data Galaxy panel, and what a panel. It's been a fascinating conversation. I hope you've got a lot out of it. I certainly have got a lot out of it, and really some great advice from people, you know, at the coalface who are doing this day in and day out. So I really hope that was extremely helpful to everybody. And thank you to our brilliant panel. Virtual round of applause, of course, to Emma, to Mark, to Sasha, and to Yojas. Thank you so much for all your contributions and all your input. That was amazing and just a fascinating conversation. So thank you so much. So please stay with us on the main stage for the next panel, which is exploring regulation and trust in a world of open finance. But from myself and the Guardians of the Data Galaxy, thank you so much for being with us, and we hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you and bye-bye.